Bobby Fischer's understanding of Sicilian defense and especially Najdorf variation was extraordinary and beyond his generation. In the 5th video of Najdorf variation series, I'm going to show you a very beautiful and strategical chess game between Unzicker and Fischer in 1962 Men Olympiad in Varna. This game has been commentated by Bobby Fischer himself, and I'm going to explain Bobby Fischer's ideas to you to see how he thinks about Najdorf variation. Unzicker started this game with pawn to e4, played with c5, knight f3, d6, and after d4, cd, knight d, knight f6, we have open Sicilian Najdorf variation. And Unzicker replied with bishop e2. Let's see what Bobby Fischer said about this move. On and off, White resorts to the solid and still respected system championed by Smyslov whenever the sharper systems fail, sharper tries fail. So bishop e2 is a positional line which championed by Vasily Smyslov, and Fischer basically says with whenever bishop g5 or bishop c4 or other sharper systems fail, white players usually play this bishop to play something positional. And Bobby Fischer replied and he wrote that Black's expectations in this Najdorf variation is that his control of important central squares like d4 and f4 and d5 also, mostly d4 and f4, his control of important central squares with possibilities of queenside expansion will more than compensate for the slight weaknesses of his backward queen pawn. So Bobby Fischer's position is that his backward d6 pawn is a weakness, is a slight weakness, but his control over the central squares and his possibility to expand on the queen side is enough compensation for this weakness. Knight to b3, bishop b6. And he wrote that to provoke f4, f5, weakening White's kingside pawn. So bishop b6, it's provoke f4, White really wants to play f4, but after f4, White kingside pawn will be weak, especially the e4 pawn and also other pawns. White replies with castle and knight to d7, and here White plays f4. This is what Bobby Fischer wants. He wants to bring some life into the position. His opponent has some ideas to play f5 in future, but whenever you play f5, look at this e4 pawn. Now this e4 pawn is still weak, is as weak as this d6 pawn. And now queen to c7 to prepare bishop c4, f5, and now bishop to c4. And here White replies with a4 to hinder b5. It's what Bobby Fischer said, and bishop to e7. He says that bishop e7 was better than rook c8, a5, bishop e7, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, some rook a4, queen c7. It's a game that have been played bishop e3, h6, rook f2. This with a bind for White. White controls this c2 square and he has a bind on the position, controlling everything. This game has been played in Schmidt events in the same tournament in Varna 1962. So Fischer thinks that in this position bishop e7 is much better than rook c8, so he played bishop e7. And here White replied with bishop e3, castle, and White still played this a5 move, which Fischer thinks it's not a very good idea. And also chess.com website thinks that it's not a very good idea. Fischer wrote that a critical alternative is g4. g4 in this position is to start an attack on the king side, and the typical response for Black in this position is for sure pawn to d5. And in pawn to d5, Fischer explains that if g5, I will play d4 and my position is completely good. You know, if g takes f6, knight takes f6, and if takes, Black is completely okay. And if against knight takes d4, he also has bishop c5 to pin this knight, and I prefer Black in this position. So Fischer just wrote that after d4 he's okay. So after d5, he also wrote that if my opponent takes on d5, I will recap. And if he takes, I will play knight f6, attacking this pawn, and he cannot play d6 because I will take. And if he takes, I will take, and if he takes, I take. And after king h1, I will have a check on e4, picking up the bishop, and Black is completely winning. So you can see that Fischer had a very excellent understanding of Najdorf at those days. So his d5 was a great idea. And against d5, he also wrote, if e takes d5, I will play bishop b4. Let me explain. Chess.com says knight b6 is a very good idea, and after king h1 you can take on b3, which is a very counterintuitive move, and after c takes b3 you will just simply play h6 and you have some pressure on this pawn. b3 pawn is weak, but black's best chance in this position is to obtain equality because it's opposite color bishop and white has more chances. But what Fischer wrote is very interesting for me. He says bishop b4, and after g5 I will take on c3. Okay, if you recapture I will take on d5, so you need to take, and I will take on b2. I don't care about f takes g7, and I just simply play rook f d8, and after rook b1 I will put my bishop on c3. And he says, after this variation, look what he says. White pawns are overextended, look, overextended, and his king is exposed. This is his practical understanding of chess. He knows that in this position he can beat his opponent. He of course, Fischer knows that his opponent can play something like f6, but he has so many ideas, rook c8, knight b6, and look at this exposed king. So it was what Fischer relying on. But Unzicker didn't play g4 in this game, and he played a5, and now comes a very typical idea which Fischer played in this game, b5. He wrote that too passive is h6, and after g4 knight h7. Still black can play d5, but Fischer wrote that this line is too passive for black and I don't like it. So white will continue with h4 with this bishop f2, and he obviously prefers white, so Fischer didn't went into this line and he played b5. You might say, okay, after a takes b6, knight takes b6, then it's obvious that this a6 pawn is weak and white can use it. But Fischer understood this position very well. White took on b6, but Fischer wrote that at Curacao 1962, Geller had found the right line, king h8, king h1, and after rook f c8, because white intended to take on b6 and take on c4, now we can take back with this one, for example like this. This is what Fischer wrote. And after these lines, he said that queen e2, rook b4, and rook a2. And he says, and black is hard pressed to defend his a6 pawn. You know that white is coming to attack it. And he says, and black is hard pressed to defend his a pawn, but h6, rook fa1, and just simply bishop f8, rook takes a6, rook takes a6, rook takes a6, and now queen b7. And now after knight a5, I will play queen c7, and after knight b3, I will play queen b7. And black has enough compensation for sure. He has some pressure on this, so after knight a5, queen c7, I'm going to take this one, and if you come back, then it will be a threefold repetition. So it's this line is written by Zuckerman, and it's an equal position. So maybe at after knight takes b6, king h1 was better, but Unzicker played bishop b6, and this line has also been played by Mikhail Tal. We will also see this game. Bishop takes b6, queen takes b6, and now king h1. He was checked, so he should have moved the king. And now a very nice move by Bobby Fischer, which took me a long time to understand this move. Bishop b5, a move that I will never play during a game. I will probably play something like d5 or rook f8. These moves are very natural for me, but Bobby Fischer plays bishop b5. He says that intending bishop c6, he gives it an exclamation mark. He says that I'm intending to play bishop c6, pressuring on e4, and then he wants to play a5. A very excellent idea, and here white made a mistake and took on b5 with his bishop. Fischer says white has already dissipated his theoretical advantage. He should settle for something like knight takes b5, a takes b5, and queen d3, white with opposite colored bishops. So you can see his understanding. This is not the best line of engine in chess.com, but you can see there is opposite colored bishops, and if the knight is exchanged, then for example something like b4, white can also play knight d2 and bringing his knight to c4 someday. So probably white can maintain equality. So Fischer wrote that my opponent should have settled for something like this, settle something like knight takes b5 to have a equal position. But white took on b5 and says, wait, hang on a second, I will just play knight d5 and I have good knight, against bad bishop? In theory, yes, but we have an active bad bishop, especially when it goes to g5, and not an active knight. This knight is very different from a knight if the knight was on d5. It's a very different scenario. And here, white says, okay, I'm attacking this, my queen is in perfect place. What is Fischer thinking? Fischer simply plays rook a4 and he says, avoid conceding the a file and puts pressure on the kingside pawn. So he, and the king's pawn, not kingside pawn, I was mistaken. So this is king's pawn, pawn on the king's file. So this pawn is very weak and black can now attack it. And here white replies with c3, okay, to control some dark squares, and queen a6. Chess.com says it's an inaccuracy, but Fischer thinks that it's a very good move and there is no harm in it. And white plays h3. Fischer says it's hard for white to hit upon a constructive plan. At Curacao 1962, Tal played against me rook a d1. So rook a d1 is much better. Tal played it, rook c1, rook c8, and knight c1, b4. So black expanding on the queen side is minority pawn attack. Knight to d3, b takes c3, b takes c3. If you know Mikhail Tal, you know that he solve his problems tactically. So he saw that in this position this pawn is weak. Probably something like queen d2 will come to mind, but Tal says, okay, I'm playing knight d3, and if he takes, I will take back, and I have some knight takes e5 tricks. And here, what Fischer wrote in this position is that I should have played knight. He says, and now rook takes c3 instead of my rook a5 lemon. It means an imperfect move. Rook a5 by Bobby Fischer was imperfect, and I guess the game ended in a draw after rook a5. But he says I should have taken on c3, and after knight takes d5, I can take back. If he keeps check, it's pretty clear that black has bishop f8 and nothing happens. Of course, he will not take on d8 because rook takes d8 is just mating 1. But I guess what Fischer was afraid is what queen takes e5, attacking these two at the same time, and there are all kind of tricks. For example, if you play bishop f6, he will just simply play queen e8 check. So this is not possible, but the brilliant move in this position is to play bishop b4, and it's a very hard move to spot because at first you can see rook d8, but now you can play bishop f8, and the difference is now my queen attacks this pawn, and after rook ga1 I can just simply come back to c8 and black is completely winning. And another very important variation is after queen takes c3, black has queen takes f1 intermezzo, and after rook takes f1 bishop c3. So this desperado move was very important, and I guess it was missed by Bobby Fischer. So that game Tal managed to maintain a draw, but in this game, so Bobby Fischer was still very better in that game also, but in this game white played a Luft with h3, which weakens this kingside pawn, kingside much weaker. But okay, Bobby Fischer in this position tried rook to c8, maybe rook comes to c4, attack this e5, e4 pawn, rook fe1, defending it, and h6. A handy Luft. Fischer also gives this move an exclamation mark, as becomes apparent later. So this Luft is very handy, and it will be apparent for us why Fischer played this move at this position. h6, king h2, and now bishop to g5. He activates his bishop. So now this bishop is dominating this knight. This knight doesn't have a good square to go. And here, white made another mistake. He should have played rook a d1 to not creating more weaknesses. But he plays g3. Maybe he was thinking that I will play h4 or something. But he weakens kingside more and more by this move. And now queen to a7, an excellent move. The queen is intending to come to f2. And white says, okay, I will just play king g2 to defend it. So what's wrong with this? And now an excellent chess move by Bobby Fischer. Rook penetrates the second rank, and now he wants to take on b2 with check. In the game, white made a blunder, king f1, but can you find the best move for black in this position? What is the move that white missed? Write down in the comments, and please like the video if you like it till now. Bobby Fischer replied with a rook sacrifice on c3. So if you take back, of course, queen f2 is mate. This is mate in 1. And if you take this rook, then rook f3 check. I king e2, rook king d3. And Bobby Fischer wrote that after this, I will play queen takes b2. And now you can see the king can run. If you give a check, then I will just simply go to h7. And this Luft, handy Luft, helped black a lot in this variation. But of course, in this position also queen c7 is winning with the idea of queen c2, but there is no need. So black won this game and white resigned after rook takes c3. You might say that, okay, what happens after rook takes a2, but okay, then queen takes a2, and if you rook takes rook e2, once again rook takes c3, and black has a decisive shot in this position. Probably knight a5, queen takes d5, e takes d5, and then rook d3. And black is completely winning because after knight c6 I can also take on d5 and the bishop covers this square, and if h4 I will still play bishop f6 and black is 2 pawns up and he will win this game. So a very important game by Bobby Fischer, and after rook takes c3 white just resigned this game. Strategical and also tactical game by Fischer. His understanding and his explanations was beyond my understanding, and I learned a lot of things with this game, and I decided to share it with you to understand Sicilian Najdorf more and more. And in the next video I might show you a very beautiful game between none other than Mikhail Tal against Bobby Fischer. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and give your supports to me to encourage me to continue this series, because I really like Najdorf, but yeah, I need also some energy from you. So thank you very much to watch this video till now, and enjoy chess, and